May 21st, 2026. Three of the world's biggest pharma companies made significant deals with AI companies, and they went almost completely under the radar. Eli Lilly, literally the most valuable pharma company of all time, just opened up decades of their most highly guarded data. Bristol Myers Squibb just handed one of the most powerful AI companies in the world the keys to almost their entire operation. And Incyte just wrote a check for $120 million to an AI company to go hunting for molecules that they don't even know the name of yet. Now separately, these three stories are pretty interesting, but line them up side by side, and they quickly become three pieces to the same puzzle. So why is nobody connecting the dots? So in this video, we're gonna break down the science of why these three deals could change how every new drug gets made, and why they could become the central dogma of AI drug discovery. What's up, nerds? Now, if you've been around this channel for a while, you know that AI in the pharma world has been a little all over the place recently. Normal chatbots hallucinate more than me after getting my wisdom teeth taken out, but algorithms made by the smartest of nerds and trained on very specific science can reduce the time it takes for a molecule to get to a clinical trial by almost 50%. I still have my doubts for using AI in pharma, but it's undeniable that there is still a lot of promise for getting new, better drugs to patients quicker. Now here's the thing. The main reason why AI hasn't fixed drug discovery isn't just because the models aren't smart enough. It has to do with these three specific bottlenecks that take into account the whole implementation. The first bottleneck is around data accessibility. You see, AI learns from examples, but the most valuable examples in pharma are unpublished, proprietary, and locked behind these very heavily gated big pharma servers. It's nearly impossible for machine learning algorithms to get their digital hands on these delicious goodies. The second bottleneck is about workflow integration. Right now, most pharma companies use AI like a very expensive Google search. You ask it a question, change tabs to play a few games of Minesweeper, the AI answers, and then you take that information and put it back into your spreadsheets. These algorithms aren't seeing the entire drug discovery process, from experiment planning to molecular design to these in vivo studies. It's like every shitty detective movie you've ever seen. There's all the concepts on the board, but there's no red string connecting all the dots. The third and final bottleneck is around chemistry. As I've shown many times on this channel, general purpose AI sucks major donkey nuts at actually being able to design a drug. It doesn't understand the nuance that chemistry has on our very complicated biology. Things like how a molecule moves through the body, how it binds to different proteins in different geometries, whether that candidate's going to destroy someone's liver just days into a clinical trial. Handling all of this requires a system that was built specifically to deal with all the nuance. If you haven't caught on already, these infrastructure problems, they're not just meant to be cared about by big pharma shills and drug development nerds. They're the very real, very significant hurdles that prevent potentially curative medicines from getting to the patients that need them the most. In fact, 50% of the time that the FDA gives a complete response letter, this final decision that says, no, you can't use that drug to help patients with their life-threatening condition, is because a company can't properly overcome these bottlenecks to manufacture the drug that they want. It's not because the drugs don't work, it's that they're not made in a well-integrated way. The real cost of slow drug discovery are the lives of real patients. This is why these three headlines are so exciting, because each one is tackling a different one of these bottlenecks to try and get those drugs to patients just a little bit faster. And these deals are kind of like the central dogma of molecular biology. You know, DNA makes RNA, makes protein. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but it'll make sense in a minute. One deal tackles the first bottleneck, how information is stored in the pharma world, just like cellular DNA. Another deal about how to connect that knowledge to every workflow, just like messenger RNA. Finally, a deal about making an AI platform that takes all of that and actually designs the drugs. The central dogma of AI drug discovery. Information, workflow, translation. So let's dive into the specifics of it, shall we? Let's start with the DNA, that stored blueprint. This deal is all about Eli Lilly, the literal highest value pharma company of all time. Though known for their obesity and diabetes portfolio, they've been splashing big bucks over the last few years to buy nearly every company that has a promising clinical candidate. And this has massive effects on how everyone discovers new drugs. The data in their servers isn't just Lilly's. It's the accumulation of all of the knowledge and libraries of compounds that they've acquired over the years. Potentially millions of promising drug candidates that only they can see. Until now, Lilly just integrated their internal AI platform, known as TuneLab, into a different platform called the CDD Vault. This is a secure data sharing platform that small biotech companies use to run their day-to-day chemistry workflows. Through this integration, these much smaller companies can now get access to the data and other predictive models that trained on decades of Lilly's proprietary research data. To understand why that matters, I have to introduce one of the most terrifying hurdles to overcome in the entire drug discovery process: absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion, and toxicity. ADMET. A drug company's new star player needs to prove that it doesn't get destroyed by your gut before it reaches the bloodstream, or that it can physically cross the membranes that it needs to get to its final destination, or get altered chemically into a structure that's no longer active, or that it can safely leave the body after it's done being useful. And finally, that it doesn't bind to an off-target site that ends up doing more harm than good. Every drug candidate has to clear all 5 of these checkpoints before it even touches a human being. Most drug candidates fail here because the body is extraordinarily complicated and incredibly good at dealing with molecules that it doesn't recognize. Deciphering this ADMET code, it's mad expensive and mad time consuming. But small biotech companies don't have the luxury of this kind of time and money. But you know who does? The $1 trillion pharma company. Eli Lilly has been running these types of compounds through the gauntlet for decades. TuneLab, their AI database, is trained on the successes, the failures, and the whys. Reasons for why promising candidates didn't get through all 5 checkpoints, and potential explanations that push them in the right directions to get a candidate that was successful in clinical trials. And with how many companies Eli Lilly has acquired in the last few years, that's 21 companies in the last 4 years alone. That is a lot of mistakes that these smaller biotech companies can learn from, which in drug discovery might genuinely be more important than learning from their successes, allowing smaller biotech companies to make potentially life-saving treatments much faster and much cheaper. Next up is the RNA, this molecular messenger that actually takes the information that's stored and brings it to the machinery to actually make some stuff. Bristol Myers Squibb, commonly known as BMS, is one of the biggest oncology immunology companies on the planet. And they just signed a deal with Claude Enterprise for what they're calling their shared intelligence platform across global operations. Now, I'm fluid in marketing bullshit, so let me translate. All 30,000 of their employees will be empowered not just to use AI to answer their silly little questions, but to actually run significant parts of their drug development operation. And they specifically outlined 3 cases of where they want to use Claude the most. One is using AI to write and accelerate engineering work, standardizing how they build and deploy systems throughout the organization, focusing on connecting areas that were previously disconnected. 2, in embedding agents directly into those workflows that move candidates through development. This includes everything in the process, from literature searches at the preclinical stage to experimental development, manufacturing and chemistry controls, and commercial and medical affairs, the whole 9 yards. And finally, connecting Claude to what they call their institutional knowledge. Very similar to what we just saw with Eli Lilly. Decades of internal scientific rationale and meeting notes, which for a company as big as BMS, who have bought 13 companies in the last decade, is, like with Eli Lilly, happening at a massive scale. Putting all this together, that's basically BMS giving Anthropic the keys to their jag.
Carte blanche with the budget, motherfucker.
And here's where things get a little sketch. In that same week, Anthropic quietly acquired a stealth biotech company called Coefficient Bio. The deal was reportedly worth $400 million, but there's not a lot of details. So to me, this seems like the opposite of what Eli Lilly is doing. Rather than expanding their horizons and let other people use these data, they're taking very hidden partnerships and bringing all of that DNA, all of that stored knowledge in-house. Now, BMS is claiming that this will help medicines reach patients faster, but it's yet to be seen whether this type of safeguarding information will actually speed things up. Let's get into the specifics of our last point of this central dogma. This deal comes from a company called Incyte. They're nowhere near as big as BMS or Eli Lilly. And they spent $80 million upfront with $40 million in equity towards a company called Genesis, specifically to develop 5 drug targets that they haven't named yet. So if I'm understanding this right, that's $120 million to basically say, hey, keep opening packs of Pokemon cards until you can get me 5 first edition Charizards.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
This seems like quite the risk. What does Genesis do that other AI companies can't do? To understand why this deal isn't that risky, we have to understand Pearl, Genesis's AI platform. It operates on 4 main principles. Generate, where the AI proposes these novel synthesizable drug substances. Predict, which is generally where the magic of Pearl is. Pearl predicts the 3D protein ligand binding structure, so those binding interactions, with incredible sub-angstrom accuracy. They even claim they can predict these interactions better than AlphaFold, the thing that won a Nobel Prize. We'll come back to that in a second. Perl also predicts over 30 ADME properties computationally. So remember those very difficult to overcome ADMET criteria that we mentioned earlier? Chemists can start to plan around how they want to solve that before they even stick a single pipette into their mouth. And there's interrogate, where chemists can visualize those 3D binding structures and compare them across different candidates. The agentic AI scores and ranks them, basically makes like a Billboard Hot 100. And finally, there's decide, where chemists take all this information and choose to go ahead with their top candidates. And it's all wrapped in the same agentic chatbot. So while you're falling in love with it, you can converse back and forth to make sure you're choosing the best chemistries. This sounds pretty similar to what every AI company is doing these days, right? Oh yeah, we can help you predict your chemistry. For example, I made a video recently on a large deal between Eli Lilly and In Silico Medicines, where they have an entire platform that does basically this from early biology to the final clinical trial design. But here's the deal where Incyte and Genesis gets very different. You see, Perl was trained very heavily on physics-based synthetic data. It's able to predict these 3D binding structures much more accurately, and can be done on targets where no experimental crystal data exists. In this case, Genesis and Incyte will work very closely together so that Genesis chemists can use their physical chemistry knowledge to solve the different biological problems that Incyte is trying to solve. There's this level of specificity that other models like In Silico's doesn't quite have yet. That's not necessarily bad, they're just coming at it from two different angles. In Silico Medicines is like a jack of all trades, master of none, and is trained on a lot of publicly available data. Genesis' scope is much narrower, but much better at the very specific thing they do. A level of specificity that only they can do with their internal team. So let's zoom back out a bit for a second. We can likely expect to see every pharma company investing in this type of framework, making sure you have a lot of data that can be translated throughout the entirety of their organization and have very specific models that can solve very specific problems. And I genuinely think this framework, this is the way that we bring more drugs to the patients that need it the most. However, there are still some very obvious limitations that will stop the drug discovery process from accelerating as fast as it probably needs to. Let's break it down deal by deal. As much as this Eli Lilly deal is probably the most promising one in my opinion, because it's opening up access to more and more people so they can make better, more highly informed models, we still don't know exactly how much of Lilly's proprietary info is put into that database. What if all of the actual things that will move the needle are still being kept close to their chest? That's pretty pessimistic, but it's probably in Eli Lilly's best interest to not let all of their best trade secrets just out for anyone to use. Meanwhile, BMS's deal is really cool. I like this idea of a more holistic integration of AI so that things are more easily connected. But one, what does this actually look like? As of right now, this kind of just looks like a lot of jargon. And like with all AI tools, we have to make sure that BMS is implementing it as exactly that, like a tool, and not just as some bullshit excuse to lay off half their workforce. And finally, this Incyte Genesis Therapeutics deal. It's great how specific those models are, and as of right now, that's what's proved to be the best way to use AI in science, is you have nerds who are very specifically good at very specific things. But once again, it doesn't foster an environment where everyone is collaborating openly, because Genesis claims that only they can model these types of interactions the way that they do. When we zoom out enough, this framework, this central dogma, is the framework that the pharma industry needs, but it's only going to work once the vast majority of these things, these concepts open up and work in a way that is collaborative. Competition is good, but too much competition is not so good. But nerds, here's where I'd like to hear from you. Which part of this framework, of this central dogma, do you think needs the most work? Let me know down below, because as you know, I'll be reading and responding to all of them. And if you're interested in seeing 2 other very promising use cases of AI in pharma, you can click on either one of these videos here. But for today, that's all from me. Thank you all for stopping by, and you stay classy, nerds.